On a Friday morning, May 23, 1618, in a room high above the city of Prague, 3 men were about to be thrown out of a window. Not a crime, not a freak accident. This was a deliberate, political act. The ultimate, literal power move. It sounds like a dark joke, but this event, the act of tossing 3 men into a dusty moat, was not just a local scandal. It was the spark. The single, verifiable moment that ignited a catastrophe. A war that would shatter the map of Europe. A conflict that would last 30 years. That single toss killed hundreds of thousands of people, destroyed empires, and fundamentally changed the course of Western history. This is the story of the Defenestration of Prague, the most consequential window in history. To understand the toss, we must go back to the religious fault lines of the early 17th century. The Holy Roman Empire was an uneasy, fragile tapestry of Catholic and Protestant states. The Kingdom of Bohemia, centered in Prague, was primarily Protestant. Their uneasy peace was protected by a crucial document, the Letter of Majesty of 1609. This charter, granted by the Emperor Rudolf II, guaranteed the Bohemian estates religious freedom and the right to build their own churches. The emperor's successors, however, were devout, aggressive Catholics, specifically Ferdinand II, a Habsburg archduke who was elected King of Bohemia in 1617. Ferdinand had one clear goal: religious uniformity. He was committed to stamping out Protestantism. His first move was to ignore the Letter of Majesty. He installed 2 of his most loyal hardline Catholic deputies, known as regent lords, to govern in his absence. Their names, Jaroslav Borita of Martinez and Willem Slavata of Clum, to the Protestant nobility. This was a clear, calculated attack on their constitutional rights. The fragile peace was already cracking. The tension reached a breaking point in the spring of 1618. Protestant leaders, led by the fiery Count Heinrich Matthias von Thurn, discovered that 2 Protestant churches had been shut down and one even demolished by Catholic authorities. This was the final straw. The Bohemian estates convened an assembly. They declared that the regent lords were not acting in the king's name, but were merely following the anti-Protestant agenda of a few malicious Catholic officials. On the morning of May 23, a large group of armed Protestant noblemen marched directly to the chancellery of the Bohemian estates in the Hrodkany, the Prague castle complex. There, they confronted the 4 regent lords and their secretary, Philip Fabricius. Count Thurn presented the accusation: the lords had violated the Letter of Majesty and were enemies of the Bohemian people. The confrontation quickly devolved into a heated, physical argument. The Protestants seized the lords Martinez and Slavata, and the secretary Fabricius, another regent, Adam von Sternberg, and his aide Matthias von Thurn, a Catholic relation of the Count, were quickly excused as they were considered less hostile. The question was then shouted: what should be done with these enemies? The answer was drawn from a dark Bohemian tradition: defenestration, the act of throwing a person out of a window. This was not the first time Prague had seen it. The 2 regent lords and their secretary were dragged to the high window of the council room, a height of about 21 meters, or 70 feet, above the ground. First, Jaroslav Borita of Martinez was thrown. Then, Willem Slavata of Clum. Finally, the secretary, Philip Fabricius. This was not murder, it was a formal political execution. Yet what happened next was the ultimate twist of fate. All 3 men survived the fall. The Catholic account immediately declared it a miracle, proof of God's divine protection. The Protestants, with less religious flair, claimed the men landed on a large pile of manure and refuse that had accumulated in the moat below the castle. Martinez was stunned but able to escape to a nearby Catholic noble's house. Slavata was badly injured but was spirited away by his servants. Fabricius, the secretary, walked away nearly untouched and was the fastest to flee the city. He would later be elevated to the title Hohenfall or Highfall for his ordeal. The survival of the men mattered little. The political message was sent. The Bohemian estates had openly and physically challenged the authority of the Habsburg emperor. The moment the dust settled on the 3 fallen men, the Protestant nobles established a provisional government. They formally deposed the Catholic Ferdinand II as King of Bohemia and elected the Protestant Frederick V, Elector Palatine, known as the Winter King. This was an act of open rebellion. Ferdinand II, now furious and determined, refused to recognize the deposition. He called upon the might of the Catholic League and the Spanish Habsburgs. The response was swift and merciless. Imperial troops marched on Bohemia. The Defenestration of Prague, that political throw from a window, was officially recognized across Europe as the casus belli, the immediate official cause for the 30 Years' War, a war of religion, power, and dynasty that would consume the continent for the next 3 decades. The 30 Years' War, which began with the toss, saw an estimated 4 to 8 million casualties. Central Europe was ravaged. Entire towns were wiped off the map. Germany, in particular, lost up to half of its male population. The irony is profound. The men who fell survived the drop because of a pile of refuse, yet the fall triggered a conflict that generated centuries of refused physical and political wreckage of a shattered continent. The war finally concluded with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. This treaty completely reshaped European politics, establishing the modern concept of the sovereign nation. So, remember this fact: the course of modern European history, its nations, its religious balance, its maps was fundamentally altered by a political statement. The decision to physically throw three men out of a window, a dangerous, literal toss that ignited the world.